My name is Erica Boyne, and I'm the coordinator of museum services here at the City of Subiaco. And thank you very much for joining us for our special Remembrance Day lecture this afternoon. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you today our speaker, Shannon Lovelady. Shannon is an archivist, curator, writer, researcher, and historian with 20 years experience. She's archivist at Presbyterian Ladies College, where she looks after the school's history, records, and objects. She is also working at Museum of Perth as a curator, research historian, and writer. Most recently, Shannon was the lead researcher and co-curator of the Museum of Perth's major exhibition, The Soldiers of Barrack Street. I had the opportunity to see that exhibition, and it was absolutely fantastic. And rumor has it, we're going to go in for a round 2 soon, so keep your eyes out for that. Thanks to an early career in IT and database administration, Shannon applies her technical skills to ensure crucial information is at her fingertips fast, and I've seen her prove this 1,000 times. In 2013, she established the first of 2 projects crucial to WA's understanding of its World War I losses, with the Gallipoli Dead from Western Australia project. When completed, this project determined 1,023 West Australians died as a result of the Gallipoli campaign. WA is the only state to know the number of those that passed away at Gallipoli, and this is a very significant thing. The Subiaco Museum was fortunate enough to use the results of some of Shannon's research in our exhibition when the Great War came to Subiaco last year. And I imagine a number of you are here today had the opportunity to see her speak at the Subiaco Library when she came to speak during the Anzac Centenary commemoration. You would think after all the hard work of the Gallipoli Dead from Western Australia project, Shannon would take a break, catch up on some sleep, and maybe catch up on some reading as well. But for Shannon, the natural progression was the Western Front Dead from Western Australia project, which is what she's here to speak about today. She began it in 2016 with her normal team of volunteers, and she's currently in the thick of finding out all about the Western Australian men who served and died on the Western Front. We asked Shannon to come speak today to give you a progress report. It's by no means near completion, but she's learning a lot of interesting statistics and has a lot of great stories that she's uncovering as part of this research. And it's now my pleasure to bring Shannon up so that she can tell you a little bit more. Please welcome Shannon.
Thank you very much. Okay, as Erica just very kindly said, I'm here to speak about the Western Front Dead from Western Australia project. But can I just get a quick show of hands to indicate who's familiar with my Gallipoli work? That's great. Good fair proportion of you, and a good fair proportion of the current volunteers on that project as well, on the Western Front. Suffice to say, I'm enormously proud that we are the only state to know how many of our men died as a result of their Gallipoli service. And as Erica said, having achieved that, and as I've always said, my personal interest in World War I is the Western Front, and there was no way I could leave such a larger project undone. Exactly as no one knew how many West Australians were killed at Gallipoli, no one knows how many were killed on the Western Front, and we're going to be the only state to know that too. So after PLC celebrated its centenary last year, and I did have a little bit of a break over Christmas, I launched Western Front Dead from Western Australia on the 1st of April, and the first news article was printed in the April edition of the RSL's The Listening Post, available online. Because Western Front is a much greater project, I expected the research phase to take nearly 2 years, after which we'll have all the same kinds of stats for the Western Front that we've been able to extract for Gallipoli. But as it is, we're 38% through our research phase, so it looks like we'll finish ahead of my deadline. What's the same? I'm using the same methodology that worked so well for the Gallipoli project, with the same criteria of having been born in or enlisted from Western Australia, or lived here for some time, and their death must have been as a direct result of their service before the 31st of August 1921, this time on the Western Front. The criteria that served the Gallipoli project so well, as it seemed so neatly contained in comparison, has been slightly refined for the Western Front, particularly for the inclusion of Spanish influenza cases, which are included but also separate. As I like my data to have a high level of integrity, I still don't let anyone loose in it, and I'm still sending volunteers lists of 10 men at a time for them to complete the details and send them back. To lay the groundwork for this new project, in late 2015, I extracted the base data from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, the WA Battalion's honour rolls, and quietly approached my best researchers from the Gallipoli project. By the time I launched, I had a commitment for a brilliant team of 10 research volunteers. That's now grown to around 40, but as with the Gallipoli project, it's actually a smaller core group that does most of the research. And I'm very pleased to see a lot of them here today. Jane McClarty, who's not here today, she's one of the people on that list. She hasn't done any lists of 10. Instead, she's doing something truly amazing. In order to make sure I didn't miss anyone, I whimsically said I'd love for someone to transcribe all the WA deaths on every casualty list from March 1916 to when they stopped producing them in 1919. It was a bit of a pie-in-the-sky wish, as that's hundreds and hundreds of casualty lists. But as they all appeared on newspapers and can be accessed online through Trove and transcribed from home, Jane Ann put her hand up to do just that. I spoke to her earlier this week and she told me she's now compiled a list of nearly 6,000 individual West Australian names. This is an invaluable data set and represents thousands of dedicated volunteer hours on its own. We're just about ready to compare my 6,000 odd names with hers to find the few who may have fallen through the cracks. As with the Gallipoli project, I have a medical forensic assessment team of 10, comprised of doctors, nurses and specialists who assess the borderline cases. Emerging differences are that because of the Gallipoli project, the Western Front project is now the focus of some national attention. So to halt some increasingly heated circular debate on the project's Facebook page, I established the Higher Assessment Panel to ultimately decide eligibility for some very tricky cases. The result of each case referred to the Higher Assessment Panel is now determined by majority. Members of the new panel include Professor Peter Stanley from the University of New South Wales, Canberra at the Australian Defence Force Academy, Rob O'Connor, QC, for the finer legal points. No, Rob. Military historians Tim Lysette, author of Fremel's, and Fremantle author and archivist Andrew Pittaway. Dr. Mike Galvin, who's also a 40-year military career practitioner, medical practitioner, and expert in wheat genetics and all things military, Dr. Brenton Brooks. An early one decided by the Higher Assessment Panel was 28th Battalion Private Alexander Bethune, brought to our attention by Lynn Menalini. He was, let's say, not your ideal soldier. He was consistently absent without leave, absconding from custody, sick with influenza and VD 3 times, escaping from hospital, again, 3 times, and myriad other things. Finally arrested after a lengthy period of absence, he was charged and found guilty of desertion and sentenced to 2 years imprisonment with hard labour. That was on the 7th of September 1917. 2 days later, he absconded again, managing to avoid authorities for 7 months, until arrested once more on the 3rd of April 1918. Lynn worked out that for the 2 years he was overseas, he likely spent just a handful of days with his unit. Escorted by military police to a field prison where he was to carry out his sentence, he was shot dead trying to escape from custody once more. Members of the Higher Assessment Panel carefully examined Bethune's file, and a majority decision pushed this rapscallion across the line. Already, I've noticed a few fascinating differences between these 2 enormous bodies of collected data. The first one that struck me was the VD. For the Gallipoli lads and those who had VD before leaving Australia, and we did have quite a few of those, it was almost exclusively gonorrhoea. Once we opened the Western Front files, however, it was obvious these lads were far more likely to have contracted syphilis. One of the many interesting things I've learned in this study is that syphilis can cause synovitis of the knee. Shelley Yeo and I had a great fun unravelling that. And so can TB, for that matter. Both can mimic other diseases and clinically each other. Who knew? Next, I broke down the most common religions of these men, which was overwhelmingly Anglican or Church of England, with 55%. Behind that is Roman Catholic at 18%. Next comes Presbyterians and Methodists at 11%. Congregationalists and other at 2%. Baptists and Lutheran at 1%. The next difference I noted between the Gallipoli and Western Front files is that with more and more men departing, the women in their lives went to war, closer to home though, with the army. The Gallipoli files are filled with gracious and restrained letters from bereaved wives and heartbroken mothers, There is an almost apologetic tone to them, as if they felt they should leave this business of war to the men, and that the men knew what they were doing. I should be so grateful if you could forward my husband's death certificate. Or, may I ask, if it's not too much trouble please, where is my dear boy buried? This time around, while still gracious, the letters are less apologetic and far more assertive. There are plenty of examples, but I thought I'd choose one from Subiaco. She's Caroline Gunner, who came to Australia with her only son, Harold, and 2 daughters to escape a life of abuse from her drunken husband, Ellison. In her first years here on her own before he followed her out, Caroline became known as a very respectable woman, liked and admired by all who made her acquaintance. At war, Harold was a good soldier and consistently promoted. He was a second lieutenant when awarded a military medal for his actions at Pozieres on the night of the 5th and 6th and the day and the night of the 8th of August 1916. Though his command was reduced from a full complement to just himself and 1 other man, he doggedly held his sector of the trench until relieved. He showed great courage and ability, his citation read, and directed his work in a most cool manner, although subjected to most intense enemy artillery fire. Never was a mother so proud as Caroline, but heart-swelling pride soon turned to grief and heartbreak when Harold, 20, was killed in action 7 weeks later, still at Pozieres, on the 1st of October 1916. Her first fairly assertive letter to the army was in November 1917. Will you see into the matter of my son's military medal? I wrote last May and have heard nothing since. She received Harold's medal a few months later and told him she was very pleased with the medal and all kindness to me, before adding slightly acerbically, if only my son had been spared to wear it. Her next letter in mid-1917 is also typical of this more strident female voice. It's been 9 months since my son was killed in action, she wrote, and I think it's time his things were sent on. She was gracious, though, when she received them, writing, thank you so much for my dear son's effects. I prize every little thing belonging to him. Though Caroline was Harold's next of kin, Ellison later wrote an imperious letter, laying claim to his son's military medal, in case he divorced his wife. And it was then, after a visit from Ellison, which resulted in the assault of Caroline and her daughters, in the face of possibly being denied her son's prized medal, and few, but obviously cherished effects, Caroline fought back. And she won. You can read all about that in the file for yourselves, but suffice to say, she explained the situation to the authorities. The army concluded their brief investigation, and Ellison soon learned his campaign had failed via a letter advising, in view of certain police reports which have been furnished to this office, approval has been granted for the war medals to be handed over to the deceased's mother as the person most entitled to receive. Another difference that's emerged this week is that for the eligible Western Front dead from Western Australia soldiers we have so far, 1,329, or 67%, were born in Australia and New Zealand. This is 10% higher than our Gallipoli figures. Of the largest group born in Australia and New Zealand, most are born in WA, 518. This is another departure for our Gallipoli figures, which showed most were born in Victoria, with WA quite some distance behind. Now though, Victoria, as you can see, is coming second at 435, and you can see the rest there. As far as those born in WA, in the Gallipoli results there was a slightly higher percentage, 55%, born in country WA, with 45% in Perth's metropolitan area. But for the Western Front, there is an unquestionable majority of almost 2/3, or 64%, born in country WA and 1/3 in metropolitan Perth. This pattern would need to continue for a decisive outcome, but at this stage it indicates it was mostly our country-born boys who died. I didn't collect appearance stats for the Gallipoli project, but remember a fair few, I do remember a fair few being 6 foot tall and very well built. Our finest specimens, it's often remarked. Enlistment standards being higher earlier in the war could account for this, but I am collecting stats like this for the Western Front, and I really enjoyed analysing them for today. Aside from the 20A whose eye colour is not recorded, nor yet obtained, eye colour showed a predominance by about 1/3 of blue. That 0.5 in both the blue and brown is 32nd Battalion Gunner James Hutchinson. He had one blue eye and one brown eye. At this stage, the overwhelming majority was also dark-haired. And the golden-haired exception is 29-year-old grocer and draper, 28th Battalion Leonard Coe. But those shining locks may have made him a brilliant target. After just a few months on the Western Front, he was killed in action by a bullet through his golden head, almost immediately after going over the top. Not really of importance, but just because I could, I then broke down the top 10 most common given names. The most common is John, followed by the usual royal favourites, William, George, James, Charles, and then the more mundane Thomas, Frederick, Francis or Frank, Robert and Arthur. But more seriously, our research will also uncover and hopefully settle the long-term debate on who was the youngest West Australian killed during World War I. Not necessarily under consideration by anyone before was this beautiful-looking lad, Edward Ted Giles, who said he was 18 years and 6 months old when he enlisted in February 1916 with his best mate James Harrington. But he was really just a kid, aged 15. Both were killed in action just 5 months later at Pozières on the 29th of July 1916. Ted was just 16 years and 8 days old. As far as heights, they range from the shortest, being Northumberland-born butcher, 16th Army Service Corps Lance Corporal Michael Blenkinsop, MM, at 5 foot nothing, to the tallest, Northern-born farmer, 51st Battalion Sergeant Henry Eaton, at 6 foot 4. In our data so far, most are in the 5 foot 6 to 5 foot 9 range. While the average weighed 143 pounds, that's just 65 kilos, which is much lighter than today's heftier standards. Their weight ranged from 20-year-old 44th Battalion Private Donald Ewers at 95 pounds, 43 kilos. He's the taller boy in this shot and was just 5 foot 2 on enlistment at 18. At the other end of the spectrum, we have 29-year-old 51st Battalion Corporal Eric Carlin, he was from West Leederville, who stood at just over 5 foot 9 and was more than twice Donald's weight at 215 pounds or 97 kilos. Most, or 82%, were single, or at least they said they were. We've uncovered a lot that had widows that came out later. There's just one of our men so far who's divorced, and for him we see a possible reason he enlisted when he did. He's 28th Battalion Private Joseph Dempsey, and on the surface, Joseph's wife of 12 years, Veronica, divorced him in 1914 on grounds of adultery with Mary Anglesey. But in fairness to Joseph, Veronica left him in 1912 and went to live in Sydney for her health. She returned in 1914, by which time Joseph had set up house with Mary, who was now expecting his child. Veronica got her divorce, but by July 1915, Joseph was before the courts once more, this time for arrears and alimony in the amount of nearly £30. The former cordial maker, racehorse owner and hotelier had cleverly divulged himself of all his assets and declared he didn't have anything with which to pay his ex-wife. Facing a possible jail term for continued non-payment, he enlisted on the 11th of September. Perhaps unsurprisingly, he was a little bit of a troublemaker in his time overseas in Egypt, England and France, with a couple of incidences of being absent without leave, and incredibly, managing to stay out of the front lines for all but a few days, through influenza, diarrhoea, mumps, a mysterious accident, a mildly sprained ankle, even sanctioned leave. But he eventually joined his unit in the field on the 3rd of August 1918, and made his way onto my list when he died 9 days later from wounds received in action. Interestingly, in spite of his daughter Winifred being his next of kin and her determined campaign to receive her father's medals, etc., they were awarded to her younger brother instead. This next one shows the breakdown of occupations. Here you can see by far the most common are as you'd expect: teamsters and timber workers, clerical and railway workers, miners, farmers, farmhands and labourers. Looking at this, it struck me that WA lost men, just how many we will determine, at all skill levels and across all industries in government and private enterprise, as well as those just trying to make a living. They lost farmers, orchardists, bakers and grocers, the men who grew their food, made their bread and sold it in their shops, tailors, hairdressers, tobacconists and bootmakers, timber fellers and railway workers who built and operated every facet of their railways, the brickmakers and layers, carpenters, tilers, glaziers and ceiling plasterers who built their homes and furniture that they put in them, or those who extended, repainted, wired, replumbed and repaired older homes. They lost the men who printed books, handbills and newspapers, school teachers who taught their young children and lecturers of university students, even the lecturers themselves and university students. I'm still thinking about how big the hole was that those losses left, even if the end tally is not as high as currently thought. Perhaps you can ask me about that later. Now I find the more interesting statistics are among the minority, and occupations is no different. At this stage we also have 1 cigar maker, a jeweller, 2 journalists, 2 jockeys, 2 musicians, one of whom doubled as a broad axe hand, 2 opticians, a photographer, 3 detectives, one of which worked for the WA Turf Club, the stage attendant at Perth Theatre Royal, a glass blower, 1 motorist, something most of us are these days, and the traffic inspector who worked for the Perth City Council. I'm sure all the other motorists were relieved. They also lost a master printer, a master baker, and a master butcher. 10 students, and 1 actual schoolboy. Albany-born, Scotch College student, 1st Field Artillery Brigade gunner Mark Destair Brady, who was 18 years and 2 months old on enlistment. Keen as mustard, he had permission from both his parents and was killed in action aged 19 years and 8 months on the 15th of August 1917 at Sanctuary Wood near Zillibeek, Belgium. Buried where he fell, his mates erected a cross which briefly marked his grave. His remains were found during the exhumations and reinterred. His parents sent photos of his final resting place. I've always wondered, when they signed again and again for their son's effects, his medals, etc., whether they regretted giving that consent. That's him. And there's the consent that they signed, where you can see that he's actually a schoolboy. What I've been curious to examine is how these people died. For the Gallipoli project, 4% killed in action, 7% missing and later declared killed in action, and 24% who died of wounds. It's interesting that the Western Front figures, despite the vastly differing conditions and terrain, closely mirror the Gallipoli figures, with 62% killed in action, 22% died of wounds. At this stage, there is 11% reported missing and later declared killed of action. By court of inquiry, I expect this percentage to climb higher in the processing. Next is places of enlistment, and you can see here that, fairly naturally, 96.3% enlisted in WA, and at this stage just 73 from elsewhere. This is fairly close to the Gallipoli figures, and there's more to look at here, but I'll save that for next time. Next is the stated ages on enlistment. Aside from the 21, for which they were not stated or yet determined, the ages the men gave on enlistment are exactly in the same range as the Gallipoli figures, from 17 and 8 months to 47. We found the average stated age of those killed at Gallipoli was a much higher than expected, 26.2, refined later with the correction of actual ages to 27.4. For the Western Front at this stage, the average stated age is 26.3. But exactly as it was with the Gallipoli figures, there is a lot of lying going on in the youngest and oldest groups. In the latter group, we have Norseman mining contractor, 3rd Tunnelling Company sapper Thomas Finch, who declared himself 44, but was actually 56 on enlistment and 58 when he died. 58 he may have been, but he's a case for not discriminating on age. After he died, newspapers reported that only a few months previously, he'd been with a night party laying pipe bombs supposed to shatter German barbed wire defences. Finch wasn't with them when they returned. During the night, they reported the Germans had blown the British trenches out of existence. It turns out Finch had heard the desperate calls of an English officer and went to the aid of the few British soldiers left alive. They said when he appeared, he made all the difference, got their guns firing, and together they held the line until relief came. By his spirit and example, they said, Finch saved the position. Poor Finch then developed acute nephritis. He was invalided to England, where he died 99 years ago today. At the youngest end of the spectrum, I've already told you about gorgeous Ted Giles, one of those 18-year-olds who was really just 15. So I'll tell you about another young one, the lad with the second youngest stated age, Subiaco-born Reginald Walter Dovey. Reg was born on the 4th of October 1896 and went to school at Subiaco in Jollymont. He was working as a plumber and was a month shy of his 18th birthday when he enlisted in the war's earliest days on the 9th of September 1914. Unusually, he stated his correct age, which was more than 3 years underage, but there is no signed consent form from his parents in the file. Reg fits beautifully within our emerging statistics of the appearance of our average soldier killed on the Western Front. He was 5'9" at the top end of the height average, with a tanned complexion, blue eyes and brown hair, again, the perfect average. What we don't know until we look at the man and what he accomplished is that he was also a good lad and a much better soldier than most. Originally assigned to the 16th Battalion, he was at the Gallipoli landing and lasted through those horror-filled first days. in particular the night of the 2nd of May, when they climbed Bloody Angle, a night which decimated the battalion and nearly broke its spirit. Fewer than 300 of the 1,000 men who landed just a week before were left standing that day. Reg lasted until he was shot in the buttock on the 6th of May. Evacuated off, he recovered and briefly rejoined his unit at Gallipoli on the 17th of June before a problem with his eyes saw him away from the action until he returned again on the 8th of October. He'd missed the August offensive, which probably saved his life at that stage. After the evacuation in Tel el-Kebir in early 1916, he transferred to the 4th Machine Gun Company and was deployed to France in June. He was immediately promoted to Lance Corporal, then Temporary Corporal in August, and Sergeant in September. In early 1917, Reg spent a couple of months in hospital with VD before returning to the front on Anzac Day. In August, he was selected to attend Machine Gun Cadet School in England and qualified for a commission as a second lieutenant in December. He joined his unit again on the 4th of April 1918 and was promoted to lieutenant on the 10th of May. He was reportedly well liked and respected by the men in his unit and was an excellent officer and soldier. On the 4th of July, he was leading a machine gun team in an advance on Bearwood in the Battle of Hamel, when a high explosive shell burst among them, killing Reg and his corporal outright. Witnesses say he was buried where he fell. Worse, another witness stated, it was one of our own high explosive shells. Surprisingly, Reg doesn't have a plaque in the Kings Park Honour Avenues, despite the care and love of his family. There are no happy endings here, counting the dead, and despite consciously locking my heart away and not looking at these men's stories until the research phase of the project is done, I found it confronting when I've seen a brother, or two, and sometimes three, of one of our Gallipoli men on the Western Front list. I first came across Jack and Malcolm Knapp of Boy Up Book when writing their article for my Gallipoli Remembered column in the Post last year. In the 3 days of research I took to write it, I tracked down and united 4 different branches of their family all over the world, and some incredibly significant items came to light. Memorial plaques or dead man's pennies, both the boys' diaries, dozens of beautiful photos, letters and more. I was able to scan all of these and share them with the various branches of the family. But those items also helped me write their story. Both in the 28th Battalion, Jack died 101 years ago tomorrow from dysentery caught at Gallipoli. It was more than a month before Malcolm was told. He was very close with his brother, and he wrote to his mother the next day, "It's a terrible blow to me, as we were inseparable and got on so well together. Our captain most considerately let me off parade for the whole day, for which I was very thankful, as I could not have borne to have anyone's sympathy just then. I feel so sorry for you, dear, and wish I could be with you to cheer and comfort you a little. It is very hard to be without him. He was such a fine, strong fellow." Thanks to Malcolm's diary, we know he went to Alexandria and saw the nurse who tended Jack before he died. He also located Jack's diary and his grave in Chatby Military Cemetery, among the other hundreds of graves as yet unmarked. He fashioned a temporary cross, inscribed Jack's particulars on it, and placed it there with a wreath at its base. Malcolm then went on to France, and the last entry in his diary, recovered though his body was not, was on the last page. It was the 28th of July 1916, and they were at Pozières. Under the last entry he wrote, "My dear mother's address, to which please send this book if I should not be spared, and she will thank the sender." The next day, Malcolm and 2 other soldiers who'd become separated in the action were crawling from shell hole to shell hole, trying to make their way back to their unit. Under heavy machine gun and high explosive shell fire, they'd made it through 2 shell holes. They were heading to a third when Malcolm suddenly and inexplicably jumped up and ran off, parallel to the enemy's front line. He was never seen again. The family are left with the feeling that he filled his diary and thought, well, that's it, that's the end. For the last couple of years, Channel 9 has asked me for soldiers to feature in their telecast of the Kings Park Anzac Day dawn service, with media attention finally shifting away from Gallipoli towards the Western Front. This year I chose Malcolm. Lastly, I'm delighted to report that thanks to high-res images kindly provided by Claire Greer, who's here today, and doing her own incredibly significant study on the men of Subiaco, my team and I have transcribed the entire World War I section of the State War Memorial and are populating those names with the data we're collecting, regardless of their eligibility for the project. When complete, I'll gift this data back to the trustees of the State War Memorial, the Kings Park Honour Avenues Group and the RSL, and we'll make this information available to anyone who wants it. The benefit of this is twofold. First, no one will have to get in their car and drive up to the memorial to see if someone's name's on it, as they do now, and I'm not kidding. And second, I believe that we can take on the sometimes overlooked Egypt, Palestine and Sinai Dead from Western Australia project at the same time. So when we finish this mammoth task, if I have time, I'd like to resume writing my column for the Post in the lead up to the Armistice Centenary, this time of course on lads lost on the Western Front. At 38%, we still have a long way to go, and I sincerely thank you for your interest at this stage. If you'd like to hear about developments and emerging research, please join the Facebook group. Finally, I think you can see as we examine each of these soldiers, they and their families come briefly to life. We will remember them, not just today, lest we forget. I'll have plenty more in time to come, but for now, thank you. I'd like to ask questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Shannon?
Barbara?
Can I just go back to, you were saying that you are going to put the data that we're uncovering available online, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So all of the notes that we're uncovering will be available?
The notes, I'm not sure, because some of them are intensely personal.
Okay.
So, but yes, there's no reason why we shouldn't. I would like to.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all there and it's been uncovered, so.
Yeah, and I'd like to combine that with the Gallipoli database as well,
Yes.
and upload that.
Yeah. And also, second question, the Middle Eastern campaign, did you say we are going to do that
We are.
next?
We're doing it now.
Oh.
Yeah, all those ineligibles that are not eligible for the Western Front, we're slowly knocking those off as we are doing the whole lot on the War Memorial.
So the ones that I've had that were the Eastern campaign, you are accumulating into that. So
Yep.
they're not being done as a separate project, they're just
No,
being...
it's just being knocked off at the same time.
That's great.
Because we're looking at mass data, so we
Yeah.
may as well look at all of it together.
Would you research it to see if they're eligible? So
Yep.
you've got
And
data
gathering
there.
the stats and so on. So the RSL are meeting with them in 2 weeks' time to see how we're going to actually do that and make it work, and Kings Park on the Avenues group will benefit from that too.
So the list that you've got at the moment is just ones that we are thought to have died on the Western Front. We
And
have another
actually
list.
it's everyone on the State War Memorial,
Oh, okay.
so eligible or not. So, Yes?
Shannon, when you have two different dates, one that's on the certificate as to what age they said they were and one that was the real age, how do you differentiate those on your statistics?
Well, I'm not, because there's just too many to research where each man was born. So I am going on stated age. And if they said they were that age, that's fine, but I will be looking at the ones that say, for example, 21 years, no months, or 18 years, no months, because they're the ones that immediately raise a red flag that they're lying about their age. Similarly, those who say they're 44 and 11 months, or 43 and 11 months, because you know that there's 42 no months, because they're probably lying too. So for the bulk in the middle, I'm not checking, but for the ones either end, I'm looking at where I can and where we have time. For the soldiers of Barrack Street, there are 2 boys in that called the McBrearty brothers, and they were 17 and 18 years old, and the 17-year-old said, yeah, I'm 24. Oh, actually, no, I'm only 19. Oh, 17. The next one said, oh, I'm 23, and they accepted him. So, I can't check all of them, but, I will be looking at the ones that raise the flag.
How did you,
Curtis?
you had a few that were sort of 17 going on 18, yet you showed permission, that you showed school permission slips, and you mentioned in response to the previous lady's question behind me that, yeah, obviously ages are a little questionable thing. How would we go around that, especially using, like you said, because he was such a young lad, there will be red flag raised, and the fact that you used like a school form.
Yeah.
There's some evidence there.
A schoolboy. I mean, bearing in mind as well, back in those days, you could actually be at school. It wasn't unusual to have 21-year-olds during their leaving at school, especially country boys. So age wasn't related to the year they left school.
So it wasn't just 17,
days.
18 on leaving the
No.
school system.
But the other thing, this project is just counting a number, really, at its core. But I do like looking at the stories and find a great deal of interest in the minority. So in the ones that are left out on the outside, so they naturally draw my interest. Yep.
Yeah, how do you find out the real age? Are you going back to birth certificates?
Not certificates, but usually registrations or newspaper notices. South Australians
I've
read their
done a
lives
lot
in the papers.
I've done a lot of work on the family history. It's a minefield. You know, half the certificates are wrong, newspaper reports are wrong, etc. So even if somebody says that they're 18 plus 3 months, they might in fact be 18 plus 3 months.
Yeah, they might. But it's the ones, as I say, that say they're 18 years and 0 months that I look at. And 18 years and 3 months wouldn't faze me, especially if they've got a letter of consent in there. But there are the 15-year-olds, and I'm hoping that we will get to the bottom of that. And it's because of that I will examine those younger-looking ones that definitely lied. But newspaper reports are rarely wrong as far as dates of birth. But the registrations can be wrong because they can be born at the end of the year before, and they can't, they may not appear in the registrations until the following year. So we could be a whole year out on registrations. Similarly, they could be, die at the end of one year and then the next. So I'm hunting down births, deaths and marriages, or not marriages, births and deaths all the time, as are the whole team.
Just one other question. Do you have any problems with privacy? You said, for example, that you have very personal letters, and do you have to somehow or other get permission to even read them in some cases?
People tend to give me things,
Right.
and I love that.
Yeah.
They also tend to tell me things,
Right.
and I think because I'm interested, they like to go through this stuff as well with someone who's interested. Quite often when I approach a family, I'll know more about their family history structure than they do. So I'm able to answer questions that they may have had, or they're not sure of the relationship with this off branch and so on. So I never ask a question I don't already half know the answer to. And so when I approach them, I'm usually fairly clear in what I want, and they're usually, well, they're always, I've never had an incident where they haven't been happy to share with me, like the Nat family, all of that stuff, which of course I like to give back as well. Not only did I write the story for them and put them on the Anzac Day telecast this year, but I also scanned every single one of those letters and objects and gave them a copy of that to share in their own family archives across the world. That's all over the world now.
But a lot of those letters are actually in the Australian National Archives, their war records, the letters written
the
by
ones
the
that
family,
are,
and they're in public domain. They're
So
viewable
Canberra's got
online.
them now, basically. The War Memorial, the
Well,
archives.
the
so
National
Canberra's got
The
them.
National Archives,
National Archives,
and they're available worldwide. You just have to log in and you can look up their records. So a lot of those letters are actually
So
in their
similar to
file.
how they are on Trove with news and things already, so similar, you can
Yeah.
view them.
Yeah, it's out there in the public
No,
arena.
well,
This stuff is not, like that was private, that was family sharing their private papers with me. But, and I love that. But these ones back here, they're all in the National, like that one, they're all in the National Archives file. So, gosh, I had a lot of slides, didn't I? Just looking for those earlier letters. Those ones are all from the National Archives files. So they're all in the public arena and all open.
They're all in their war record.
well, yes, they may well be in the national, the war archives or whatever. But unless when you get hold of them and your work, which I think is extremely important, becomes more public. I mean, I wouldn't even know that this existed to actually look for it. So in one sense it's public, but in another sense it's not.
I do like to spread the word that it is available. Somebody said to me not long ago, I'm going to join Ancestry and see the National Service, the war records. And I said, don't do that. It's all free and available, so easily online. You don't need to join Ancestry to see those. They're our National Archives. And we're so lucky that they are all available online. I think we're the only country in the world that has that without a charge. Yes.
Which is the best website to trace a relative that died, West Australian or Western Front?
Sorry, which is?
The best source?
Well, there are a number. First of all, I'd start with their war service record through the National Archives. Then, are you looking for a date of death?
Looking for the whole history.
Okay, I'd start with that. And then if they died, I'd go to the Roll of Honour and see if they've got a circular, which is always a bonus. If they don't have a circular, it's a bit frustrating, but always not just the typed material up here. You look below to the circular and read that, and it'll be from a relative that's filled in the information. That often gives a lot more
On the National
information.
Archive as well.
No, that's the War Memorial.
On the War Memorial?
Yeah, so Roll of Honour and the War Service Records, the series B2455 series in the National Archives. So that'll be good. Are you on Facebook at all?
Yes.
Have a look at the website, the Facebook group, Western Front Dead from Western Australia, and I'll put those up there this afternoon. Any other questions? Yes?
Any evidence of Aboriginality? I know that it wasn't required
But has your researchers come across any?
We have
anything
one,
stated?
and I can't remember his name at the moment, but if you join the Facebook group, you'll see him. He was just mentioned and written about just a few weeks ago on Facebook. Shelley, was he one of
Thomas
yours?
Ford.
Thank you, Thomas Ford. So,
He was from the country. Full. Near Katanning was.
yeah, Katanning, I remember that. And there's a photo of him too, I think, on there. Or, so he's our first one that we found. We only had the one for Gallipoli, that was James Dickerson. And so I'm expecting more, of course, being a longer campaign and higher casualties, I'm expecting more for the Western Front. And I'm hoping to uncover all of them, and I have them all identified. So I will be touching base with Jan James, etc., and all those people who are working in the Aboriginal area of research on World War I to try and pin them all down. Yes,
You mentioned articles in the Post newspaper. What's the position regarding that? Has that been arranged yet, or still to be done?
Brett has assured me that if I would like to start writing, I can. So, and he's very generously going to allow me space.
So, are you going to?
If I have time, I'm working full time at the moment, and these boys have to wait for night time and weekends. So once the number crunching is over, then I will start looking at the stories and start, probably as I did for the Gallipoli Remembered column, with small ones to start with. And as I learn more myself as well about the Western Front and the battles and things that took place, because I'm just counting them. I'm good at looking at the men. I don't know anything at this stage about the battles.
Would you be able to get, I'm not from the area, but is there a way you can get access to your columns on, is it the Post or the Community, whatever that local council news? Do they have a website, or like
Probably
the State Library would, or they have a link to it somewhere to access that, because it's a past edition? I don't know how long you can...
Yeah, neither do I. I don't think
how
they've
you
got
would
the
access
old one
archives.
up. I tried to do that the other day and it didn't work.
History
But-
teachers.
Yeah, the History Teachers Association, they're in the school curriculum, so they're actually used to teach history to years 3, 6 and 9 now, and are all on the History Teachers Association of WA website. So all of them are up there.
Did you keep a record of the soldiers that you wrote about? Perhaps you could put that
Yes.
list up somewhere.
Okay, yeah. I'll put it on the Gallipoli Dead from Western Australia, shall I?
Yeah, so.
Yes, I did. I wrote about 62 or 63 of them. Any other questions?
I've got a question which you probably told us in the beginning. What made you interested to do this? You know,
Well, as Erica said, I'm the archivist at PLC, and we had our centenary last year. So in 2013, I was research assistant for Dr. Susan Mousehart, and she wrote our centenary history, This Little World. And in trying to establish why PLC was started in such an unusual time, like, you know, at the same time as the Gallipoli campaign, right in the middle of it, she asked how many West Australians were killed at Gallipoli, and I said, oh, I'll ring Robert Mitchell at the Fremantle Army Museum, and he said, oh, we don't know. So I rang someone else, and they said, no, we don't know either. And then Wes Olsen, who wrote Gallipoli, the Western Australian chapter, he got in touch with me and said, actually, no one will ever find out. It's somewhere in the region of 900 to 2,500, but I'll take my hat off to whoever can work it out. So I kind of took that as a little bit of a challenge, and I knew that we could do it all. It was free, all the records are available online. I knew we could do it, we just needed manpower and time. So, and I started looking at the dead, not the living, because everybody was saying, well, there are 33,000 enlistments from WA, how on earth will you find them? You know, go through all of those to find them. And I'm going, well, why would you start with the ones who lived? You'd start with the dead ones, naturally. So, and we've got great records there too, with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and all the battalion honour rolls and things like that you can access. And of course, I've made contact with lots of military authors and so on who've published these things and given them to me very generously, years of their own research, and going through the dead, basically, and counting them. Hence, Jane Ann going through the casualty lists and marking all of those dead soldiers in there from WA. So that's how it happened. And then, of course, my interest has always been the Western Front, not Gallipoli. Anybody who knows me well will know that I've always said, well, how did they go on so much about Gallipoli when the Western Front was so much worse? And I think that I just couldn't leave it undone, basically. Having done it once and proven the recipe, I can do it again for the Western Front. It's just a bigger project, that's all.
and
Bigger elephant.
out of interest then, did you find a connection as to why PLC was started then?
Yes, I did. It's far more personal than World War I. Reverend George Nisbet Dodds was our founder. He later committed suicide, probably through plummeting debt. but his daughter, Chrissy, was 12 years old and he needed her to have a Presbyterian education. So there was no Presbyterian girls' college in Perth. And so he thought he'd start a girls' school that was Presbyterian so she could have a Presbyterian ladies' education. So that was why he started it then. She needed educating.
One
Barbara.
more question. Have any of the other states even thought about taking it up?
They ring me every year, twice a year. Around Anzac Day and Remembrance Day, they ring me. Like, I've had 5 calls this week and 2 emails, like really, really assertive emails saying, please forward, New South Wales numbers for those killed on the Western Front and at Gallipoli. Well, they haven't got it because there's not a me over there doing it and nobody else wants to do it for nothing.
If you look at Tasmania, it would be a simple, easy,
Yeah.
we could knock it off in a weekend sort of project. And
Well, we could, but...
Queensland possibly too. And Northern Territory, South Australia wouldn't be that huge. Sure, New South Wales and Victoria would be enormous.
Yeah. Yes, Victoria would be enormous. But yeah, it's all possible. I mean, we've eaten the elephant once. We can do it again. And we can give them our data to start with. I mean, I do all of this stuff to get it out there. I don't want to hold it like this and say, no one else can look at it. I want it out there so that we can use it and study it and use it to base future study on and examine those statistics.
Maybe
So-
we should make it a commercial enterprise and start selling ourselves out. We'll do Tasmania for you. The
We
fee is
I've actually
so much per name.
I visited Tasmania a couple of years ago and visited the Army Museum there and spoke to their head and he was so keen, but they don't have a team to do it. They don't have a leader to take it on. So, especially not for nothing. So it's a bit sad. I suppose it is a big job to do for nothing, but I just think it's something we should know. So, and I'm glad that we do, and enormously proud that we are the only state that knows that.
And it's so rewarding to do the stories that you uncover are just mind-blowing.
Yeah. And that's why I lock my heart away, because it's like, no, don't look at that man yet.
That's
Wait till
why I
after
take
the
so
data
long to
crunching.
do my soldiers because I get so involved.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay.
Well, if you
Thank
guys
you.
will join me in thanking Shannon for coming today. I think everyone here can agree that WA is very lucky to have somebody like Shannon and all of her volunteers. I see a lot of her volunteers in the crowd, and I don't think that this could be possible without people helping Shannon. But also, as you can see, this is a huge organizational system that she's developed. I'm in awe of how she manages to track everything, keep sense of everything. Anytime something different pops up, where do you put it in? How do you filter it? Her background in IT, I think, has really benefited WA as well. So just please join me once again in giving her a round of applause.